and welcome to my live video stream of the release of my newest novel, The Short Story Emporium. You can look at the cover here. I am currently streaming live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Unfortunately, the reason I'm on so late is because Instagram has decided not to want to let me go live. So that is why I'm a little late, so I apologize for that. Hopefully, I will try to stream live on Instagram in a few minutes. But let us get down to business, shall we? The reason that you are here, the Short Story Emporium. So I threw out the whole let's do a Facebook party because no one ever attends that crap. So hopefully this will be a better turnout. So I wanted to talk about my book. So basically what this is it will be about an hour and a half, most likely less, but definitely not anymore. But now that I've wasted 7 minutes of my time, hopefully all will go as planned. So basically what I'm going to do is give you a little introduction to the book, and then I will be breaking down and telling you about each of the 8 stories within it. So seeing as I'm on a streaming platform, I not take questions because I can't see them. In the event that I do go onto Instagram, I most likely will stop to take questions. But that's only if. But nevertheless, there's a Q&A later tonight. So without further ado, let me tell you about the introduction to the Short Story Emporium. So the first thing to know here is what made me decide to write a book of short stories. And to be honest, that wasn't always the initial plan. If you know me, you know that I come up with ideas for stories like people drink water. It comes to me a lot. One of the things I do whenever I come up with a title of a story or a concept for a story, and I have my phone handy like I do now, I stop and I have a little memo pad on my phone, and what I do is I write down the idea or the story title. So in this instance, this was back in 2019, 2018, 2019. I was thinking of story titles like it was going out of style. Not that it ever was style. But at one point, I had about 6 story titles. I then incorporated and added 3 more that were maybe 2 or 3 more that I had, hanging around somewhere. So at one point, I had 8 story titles on my phone with nothing to do with them. So one day, I thought to myself, gee, I kind of want to write another Western horror. My second book, A Bloody Bloody Mess, The Wild Wild West, was moderately successful. I just wrote another Western horror for an anthology called The Blood Creek Gold Rush. So I was like, I definitely want to write that Western horror title that I have sitting right there. That was the first one. It was called Nightstalkers and Lycanhawks, which I will talk about, of course, in a little bit. So the thing about this was, after I wrote that, and I wrote that in the summer of 2019. After that, I thought, gee, maybe I'll put it, in on a website like Wattpad or Shanillo. But it just sat on my computer collecting pixel dust, if you will. And eventually, one night I looked down and I realized I had 7 story titles, and I'm like, what am I going to do with these? Do I want to turn these into books? Do I want to turn short stories to post to, again, Wattpad or Shanillo? What do I want to do with these? Finally, I decided enough is enough. And in October of 2019, I decided that I was going to write each of those short stories in my phone, on my memo pad, and I was going to write a story until the end of the year. And that's exactly what I did. I would write a story, pretty much a story a week, give or take. Sometimes I think I wrote 2. Don't quote me on that. My memory's bad. I don't remember. I'm sure I distinctly remember writing 2 stories in 1 week, but not to toot my own horn. At the end of the year, I had what would become the Short Story Emporium, 8 stories. But here's the twist. I still didn't know I wanted to make them into a book. I thought, gee, what site am I going to post these on? Eventually, one of my friends, I believe, somebody close to me said, hey, you should turn that into a book. A book of short stories. It didn't cross my mind until they had said it, so I thought that's a good idea. The order in which I wrote the stories, up until now, that in the book, that is the order in which the stories are placed. And of course, the fun part came of making the book. So excuse me. What I basically did next was plan out to make the book, but it didn't have the title. The stories inside it had titles, but this didn't. So I came up with my usual generic garbage of titles like the short story collection, the short story volume, variety of short stories. All these just piss poor story titles. Finally, I thought of the short story store. That sounds kind of corny, but wait a minute. Store. There's something there. Emporium. Emporium is a store. The short story Emporium. It rolls off the tongue really nice, right? The more I said it, the more amazing it sounded to me. And boom, the short story Emporium was born. Now, like I said, if you caught what I said, I wrote a story every week until the end of the year in 2019. What happened when the clock struck January 1st, 2020? We went into a new year. That's right. I still didn't write the story in January or February. And by the time March came around, well, the pandemic happened and I wasn't able to use my computer for a whole damn year. The minute I got my computer back, you're darn right, I pieced that shit together. I edited it. I had people go over it. And yeah, I even had this glorious cover. Shout out to my cover artist. Again, just a great cover, I think. And yeah, so the Short Story Emporium was born. And now, last but not least, there are 8 short stories in this book. I will read you the titles, and then, of course, I will get into the titles themselves. Since I'm already running late on time, I would like to know that, yeah, I'm lucky I left myself some leeway time, huh? So, all right. Nightstalkers and Lycanhawks, Labyrinth of Torture, The Liberationist, The Kryptonite Room, Solitary Confession, The Hercules Hotel, The Golden Ballroom, and Dead Presidents Society. I don't expect you to remember all those, but again, since I'm crunching time at the moment, I will wait about a minute and a half before I start talking about Nightstalkers and Lycanhawks, and then I'll give myself 5 to 7 minutes to talk about each title and story in the book. I've set it for 10 minutes, so I'm not going to go over 10 minutes, and I probably won't use all of that 10 minutes, but again, just giving myself some time here so that you all understand what I am saying. Since I have about a minute to kill here, I am going to see if I can go live on Instagram. In the meantime, again, bear with me. I was hoping to have this all figured out, but hello, Instagram universe. I am now live. All right, let's do this. All right. So, Instagram people, I was just telling the other people that I'm also live with right now, that I'm going to be talking about the stories in the Short Story Emporium. So just waiting for it to say 12:20 so I can get started. I want to get my time figured out here. So, all right, let's do this. Nightstalkers and Lycanhawks. It's the first story in the book, and it is a Western horror. Now, if you remember me saying in the beginning, I wanted to write a Western horror again. I was just itching to write another one. So what I did was that is the story that got started. Now, I know what you're thinking. What the hell is a Night Stalker? And what the hell is a Lycanhawk? Well, obviously, I already wrote about vampires in the West. I already botched that. I wrote about zombies in the West. I wrote about aliens in the West. But then I was like, well, what about now? Vampires or werewolves? Why not both? But I didn't, me being in typical fashion, I didn't want to use vampire. So I came up with Night Stalker. And for werewolves, I came up with Lycanhawks. What the heck's a Lycanhawk? Well, a Lycanhawk, obviously, lichen, lycanthropy, werewolves. And here's the twist. Vampire cowboys, it's not your typical cowboys versus Indians. It's vampire cowboys against werewolf Indians. So the hawk part came because, Indians have that belief where they can transform into animals. So I decided, gee, Lycanhawks. So Night Stalkers and Lycanhawks is the title of the first story. And basically, it's not your typical cowboys versus Indians tale. It's pretty much, of course, it takes place after the Civil War, and vampires are able to walk around freely among humans. Humans don't have a problem with them. The vampires don't have a problem with the humans. It's all good. The Indians kind of keep away from everybody else because that's what they used to do. And basically, it's a great, gritty Western paranormal tale, if you will, and horror tale about vampires and vampire cowboys, werewolf Indians, and I believe they fight for supremacy of a former Civil War battleground. I'm not sure if the battleground is fictional or if it's real. I don't remember. I know it's called like Fort Regina, which I believe is real because I don't know why I would just randomly come up with that name. So yeah, that is the first story. And it took me only 2 minutes to describe that. The last bit I will share. I wanted to make the leader of the vampire group and the leader of the werewolf Indian group. I wanted to give them distinct names, right? So for the vampire name, I came up with, I already called the vampires Night Stalkers. So that kind of gave me, the Night Stalker, the 80s serial killer, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. But obviously, I wasn't going to just call him Richard Ramirez because that would you'd know. So I took the first name, Richard. For the last name, for all you comic book fans out there, I took one of Spider-Man's infamous villains, Michael Morbius. So I combined the two names, Richard Morbius. That is the name of the vampire leader. As for the werewolf, is any werewolf story complete without Lawrence Talbot? It's not. So I took Talbot, but I decided to make it the first name and not the last name. And I wanted an Indian name for the last name, but I ended up settling on Tecumseh. I mispronounced that. William Tecumseh Sherman. So it's Talbot Tecumseh, who is the chief of the Indian tribe. So, and they know each other. And again, it's it's probably the second longest story in the Short Story Emporium. Ironic, right? But it's really gritty, and I wanted to make that the first story, not because it was the first story I wrote, because even if it wasn't the first story that I wrote for it, it was still going to be the first story in the book because it really delivers. It's got that nice blend of Western, a nice blend of horror, that nice kind of action and adventure that you really look for in a type of story like that. So that's why I did that. And yeah, so that was, again, I wrote that, I want to say, back in July of 2019. So that pretty much sat like 2 to 3 months in my computer before I decided, like, hey, I'm going to do something with this when I incorporate it into the other story. So since it only took me 5 minutes and I'm running a little short on time, let's get into the next story, which of course is Labyrinth of Torture. Now, what can I say about Labyrinth of Torture? Well, the following story is rated R. Viewer discretion is advised. Would be the tagline for that. Labyrinth of Torture is about, in a nutshell, is about America's first serial killer, H.H. Holmes, and this a spree of his murders in his murder castle during the Chicago World's Fair. Now, 6 years ago, I think it's about 6 years ago, if you asked me who H.H. Holmes was, I couldn't tell you. Isn't that weird? It might have been longer. I hope it's longer. I didn't know who H.H. Holmes was 6 or 7 years ago. The minute I found out, I'm not going to lie, because I'm into horror and crime, I was kind of fascinated. And then I started seeing H.H. Holmes everywhere. Documentaries, TV shows, YouTube documentaries, online, you name it. After a while, I pretty much figured, like, I know so much about H.H. Holmes, I should probably write a story about it. Which brings us to Labyrinth of Torture. So I knew I wanted to write a story about him. I also figured that it's going to be a horror, it's going to be a crime, but it's also going to be historical fiction, which makes Labyrinth of Torture the only story in the book that transcends 3 genres. I mean, why not, right? So I once wrote a story called Ripper, which is about the night that Jack the Ripper almost got caught. It's a story I wrote, and it's in another anthology. And I kind of wanted to take that same aspect of the night he was almost caught. H.H. Holmes, for all intents and purposes, was eventually caught. But there wasn't one night where he was almost caught. At least I don't know. So I pretty much just took 2 actual people that were in Holmes's murder castle, and this is the fictional betrayal that I did. This is what is in the story. He welcomes these 2 women. He meets them at they're on their way to the fair, and Holmes stops them, brings them to the murder castle, and so begins the story. And I also believe I used one of his. Holmes used many aliases throughout his life, so I used one of the aliases for him in the book. And I'm not going to lie, it's pretty gruesome. I mean, let's put it this way: if you get past the first story, clearly you're ready. You're ready for the other story. This one, again, it's not for the faint of heart. So it's quite gruesome. And yeah, so I wanted to make sure that it really portrayed what it's supposed to, because again, it's based off of actual events. Like, this really happened. But of course, I have my own little fictional spin on it. And of course, my H.H. Holmes, he has to be just as sick and twisted as the real Holmes was in real life. So there is that. And the other thing, this story probably would have had to go after Nightstalkers and Lycanhawks, again, if I didn't put it in order. Simply because if I went from Nightstalkers and Lycanhawks to, say, the Liberationists, I'm totally throwing my ideas, because they're not ready. There's no transition there. Just to give you an idea, you'll know what I'm talking about when I talk about the Liberationists. But yeah, so Labyrinth of Torture. I came up with a title for that. There was a lot. If you know H.H. Holmes, there's a lot of titles you can pretty much. I could have called it Murder Castle. I could have called it Murder at the Chicago World's Fair. Death at the Chicago World's Fair, Torture Castle. Like the titles are endless. So I eventually came up with Labyrinth of Torture because if you've seen a picture of the castle, it's a freaking man. It's a maze. It's a labyrinth, and he tortured people in it. Labyrinth of Torture. Pretty self-explanatory there. Not all titles that I will tell you about came to me so easily. So the first two was some good planning, but were quite simple. All right, we're at 12:30. The third story I will tell you about here is, of course, The Liberationist. Now, The Liberationist is a straight up literary fiction. At least that's what I'm billing it under, because I can't for the life of me think of what else I could call it. So it's also worth noting that The Liberationist is the longest tenured title. In other words, that was in my mind back in 2014. I thought of writing a story called The Liberationist, but I had no idea what I wanted to make it until I had actually sat down and thought, gee, I'm going to finally write this after 4 or 5 years. But what is it going to be about? What can you really, what story can you possibly make out of something called The Liberationist? You know? So I thought of what would become the story for The Liberationist. And it's about the tale of a king in medieval times, I would say. And a king makes these three rules that he expects everybody to follow, including himself, of course. So when the king breaks his own rules, he of course says, I don't have to worry. I'm the king. I made the rules. To which one of his head people says, no, 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 sir. You broke your own rules. Therefore, you must face the punishment as well. And the punishment was death. So, of course, he's outraged, and so begins the story of the Liberationist, a tale about a king who sets three rules and forth for his kingdom to follow, breaks his own rules, and then, of course, is shunned, and he flees the country. What happens to him after that? You have to read and find out. So there's a little bit to this. Now, I'll be totally honest. This would probably be the story where people would probably decide, like, this isn't the best story I've ever read. I hear you. I thought of the story after 4 years. I had to throw it in here. As you can tell, the transition, there's really no good transition from Labyrinth of Torture to The Liberationist. But if I stuck it in between the two stories, it would have made even less sense. So this one's it's a good tale. It's definitely different from me. You know, if you've read my poems, if you've read my horror, or even my true crime, this is a total step in the opposite direction of that. So, um, the last thing, how did I come up with the title? Well, again, I don't really remember. I came up with the title back in 2014. This shit sat in my computer, on my phone, in my head, collecting every bit of dust you can imagine. Virtual dust, like everything. So basically, I believe I came up, maybe I was watching something like similar, to like King Arthur, something like that. Maybe something like philosophical, and I came up with a liberationist. And it sounded so proper and so royalistic that I was like, okay, I'm probably never going to do anything with this until I finally did. And voila, the liberationist was born. So it's a good tale. It's very Twilight Zone-esque, is how I would put it. So if you like the Twilight Zone, you might appreciate my medieval tale, Liberationist. Look at that, making good time. Five a pop here, so I might have a good amount of time left over. All right. So the next story, and after this story, I believe I will. Yeah. So I want to the fourth story, then a little bit of a break, and then I will get into the final four stories after this one. So, again, just waiting a moment. I didn't expect to look at the clock 1,000 times, but again, because I opened so awkwardly and not being able to stream live on Instagram, which I'm now on, and nobody's on. No one's on that I can see. But it's all right. So 12:35. So the next story is the Kryptonite Room. Spoiler alert, it's called the Kryptonite Room, but it has nothing to do with Superman. Sorry, guys. Sorry about that. All right. So the Kryptonite Room is probably the single most bizarre story in the entire book. It's weird from the start. It's probably unlike anything you've ever read, but after a while, you kind of sort of find yourself agreeing with the main character. And if you find yourself agreeing with the main character, you have to sort of reflect on yourself and realize, what am I doing with my life, and how am I seeing people around me? Um, so the Kryptonite Room is a tale about this man, this egotistical jerk, who just pretty much despises people, and he hates society. He hates what society's become. And to take a step further, he hates people so much that he finds ways to hurt them. And when he is able to successfully hurt them, he then takes an object or souvenir of how he hurt them, and he brings it home with him, and he puts it on a shelf in this room called the Kryptonite Room, because it's called the Kryptonite Room because he has items of the things that he uses to hurt people, and that's their kryptonite. I know, pretty different, huh? Uh, so yeah, the main character is just a total jerk, total toolbag. I think his name's Brent. And how did I come up with the title? Well, this is a very interesting story here. I usually go on. I live next to there's a factory down the street from me, and well, it's a residential home for the elderly now, but it used to be a factory. And I used to walk down this, this little platform, and I'd walk behind the factory, and the factory had a shed or a garage area, and there would either be a bulldozer or a car, some type of vehicle in there, and it would always be open, and the light that would shine in this small little room would be green. And one day I was walking by, and I said to myself, "Huh, looks like a kryptonite room." Boom. Then I was like, "Hey, that would make a good title for a story. That would make a good story if I could think of what I would write." How I came up with the idea for the story for the Kryptonite Room, that just sort of came to me because, I mean, I'm not going to lie, I don't really like the way society's become. But at the same time, I wouldn't go through the extremes that this guy goes through to like out his enemies and just rid himself of them. But it kind of got me wondering, how this would all play out. So that's why I decided to write a story about a guy who was just so fed up with the world and people in it that he decides to do something about it. And it pretty much reads as it's like a very typical like everyday type of guy, but at the same time he's just a total sleaze bucket. Like I'm really trying to emphasize the fact that this guy is just not a good person. But again, in typical Justin fashion of writing, there's a Twilight Zone-esque feeling to it. From the middle, probably to the end. I wouldn't say the beginning, because once you sort of get to the beginning, you're like, oh, okay. So there is that. I am going to take a little bit of a pause here. I still have 4 stories to tell you about, and I have a little bit more of an hour to do it in. So with that, I will probably tell you a little bit about the cover, and I will also see who is tuning in right now. And yeah, so bear with me here, people. Bear with me. I get this all figured out. Was hoping not to do this while I was live. So so yeah. All right. So I'm back, and all right. So like I said, I got 10 minutes. So I'm gonna stop talking about the stories, and I'm gonna tell you a little bit about this cover. Okay. This cover, yeah, pretty spiffy, right? And again, it's on my Facebook. It's pretty much all on my social media. So the idea for the cover was kind of one of those things that was just floating in my head. And I thought to myself, I want an item, kind of like in the Kryptonite Room. I want a an item from each story to be on the cover, so that way you get a sense of what each, like, obviously an item for each story on the cover. And I also wanted to make it a storefront, so it's not exactly like, the background is, it's sort of black, but I still love this cover. And I love the font, the short Story Emporium. It was actually yellow originally, but since the wax factory is yellow, I just felt like my favorite color is green, so I was like, make that shit green, and my cover artist did. So I'm happy about that. So yeah, so each item that's on the cover is like a little, like a storefront. So it's on the in each window. There's four items in each window, and each represents a story in the book. So obviously, let's see. I'll start off with uh, uh I'm trying to find it here. Oh, Nightstalkers and Lycanhawks. That is portrayed by the cowboy hat in the corner, and Labyrinth of Torture is portrayed by the knife. I know. I thought of like a few things that could be portrayed with Labyrinth of Torture, but a knife was probably the easiest way to go. Because anything else, like if I couldn't put like an electric chair or some crazy torture device in a window of a store, that would just be crazy, right? Um, the Liberationist is the crown. I thought that was a nice touch. That was kind of a given. And the Kryptonite Room. I mean, if I'm gonna call something the Kryptonite Room, I think you know what I'm gonna put in the freaking window. It's a little green rock, little green glowing rock. So so yeah, and then of course there's a cross. I wonder what that's for. There's also a plane. Why is there a plane in there? And there's also a champagne bottle. And then of course there's a little figurine of the White House. Now of course these all make no sense to you, but they will with with the final four stories, to which I will explain shortly. So yeah, um, Oh, okay. So yeah, the just waiting on my time factor that I told you about, waiting on some more people. I'm not even disappointed if nobody comes because you know what? I already expected it. So it's as good of a turnout as my Facebook party. Only this time I'm going in expecting to be disappointed. So you can't be disappointed if you already expect to be. Like that meme, you know? I'm just adding a little humor here, you know? So when people do come in, they're like, oh, what the hell is he talking about? All right. I am at the 12:45 point. So again, 5 more minutes and I will talk about the four stories. I would like to point out the back. The short story Emporium, a collection of stories in various genres. All are intriguing fictional tales, but some are real-life accounts that have been dramatized to become unique in their own right. If you enjoy variety and reality with a fun twist, then you'll enjoy this interesting anthology. Din din! And then, of course, it's got the little stories for sale. Again, came from this noggin. I thought of that. I thought it'd be a nice little touch. Stories for sale. And also, I went with the nice matte finish because apparently, guys, I didn't know this. Glossy, you have the option when you publish your book cover. You can go with glossy, or matte. I call it matte. I might be pronouncing it wrong, sue me. For the longest time, for my first two books, three books, I went with glossy. Only like a week ago did I find out that glossy is it should be used for nonfiction books. True story. So when I started to use matte for Wax Factory and stuff, that's actually the proper way to go. So I might actually go back and make all of my books matte since I don't actually write nonfiction. And if I did, no one would care because who the hell wants to hear my life story? It's not entertaining. But my books are. My books are more entertaining than my life story. So yeah, starting to come alive here, 40 minutes in. Yeah. All right. So again, with the final 3 minutes, I will share with you the three quotes that are in the book. The first two, again, we haven't discussed the characters in the last four stories, but spoiler alert, the quotes are from the people that are in the final four stories. The person who deserves most is a lonesome one on a rainy day who doesn't know how to read. Benjamin Franklin. The Hercules was a monumental undertaking. It is the largest aircraft ever built. I put the sweat of my life into this thing. Howard Hughes. I was born with the devil in me. H.H. Holmes. So those are the three quotes. And if you've read any of my books, you know that I always like to put quotes in the beginning. I used to do one, but then I came across a Dean Koontz book, and he had like freaking, I kid you not, he had like five quotes in there. And I was like, huh, you can do that? Of course you can. It's your book. You put as many quotes in there you want. You probably shouldn't use more than five, but again, it's your book. You can do what you want. So yeah. Um, the last thing I will talk about before I begin the final four stories in the book is the fact that the book is fairly short. It's 197 pages, and this was a bitch to figure out because I use a very old. I don't use Microsoft Word like a normal human being in 2021. I use Word Perfect. You can Google that if you have no clue what I'm talking about. And basically, Word Perfect, what it does is you can add page numbers. It has this cool thing that you can do when you're writing a story, and it allows you to add page numbers. Now, the problem with that is when you add page numbers, it kind of like expands it. So in other words, it kind of crunches your words or it spreads them out, give or take. And at one point, I forgot the size of the book, and that's a problem. I forgot what size I was going to make the book. So what happened was I put I added page numbers, and the book was like 280 words, 280 pages, and I was like, there's no way that this book is just as big as the Wax Factory and the Wax Menagerie. There's just no way in hell. But then I remembered I forgot to condense the size, so when I made the dimensions of what I wanted the book to be, it crunched back in. So then it was like 215 or like 220, and I was like, that's still not good enough. And I don't believe it. Like, I don't believe you, computer. So what I actually did was I went in, and sure enough, there's paragraphs that are like touching. I don't like my paragraphs to touch, just like I don't like my food to touch. But yeah. So eventually, I went in and I condensed it, and I'm like, oh, 197 pages. That's under 200. That works. And yeah. So again, that's just a little tale that I would share with you all. All right, 12:51. I'm a minute over. All right. All right. The fifth story in the short story emporium is called Solitary Confession. Now, there's something very interesting about this story. This story actually came to me in a dream. That's right, a dream. And the story is about a preacher who comes to town trying to rid this town of its sins. And he does so by guerrilla warfare. He torches the entire town to the ground, burns it to the freaking ground. Really? You had a dream about this? I did. I really did. So in my dream, it was just about a guy who comes to town and he just burns the town to the ground. He wasn't a preacher or anything. He was just a crazy madman. And immediately, the other thing to note here is that in my dream, he took everybody prisoner inside of a church. And in the church was actually a prison. There were cells inside the church. So when I wrote this down on my phone, I came up with prison church. But then after a while, when I finally sat down and decided I was going to write this story, I was like, I can't call this prison church. Like, it's too direct. It's vague. And I mean, not vague, but it's too direct. Like, you pretty much know what it's going to be about. So I kind of broke it down, like I feel like sometimes I have a thesaurus in my head. Like, I try to come up with different words for the words that I'm trying to describe. Okay, prison, asylum. But when you're in prison, sometimes you go to solitary. Okay. Church. People confess their sins in church. Confession. Solitary confession. Boom. So yeah, so Solitary Confession is the story about a preacher who comes to town. He burns the town to the ground, and everybody in the town they're for this. They believe in this man. They see him literally burn their town to the ground, and they're like, praise the Lord. Praise you, preacher. We believe in you. But there's one guy in town that doesn't believe them, that doesn't believe in this preacher, and that's the sheriff. This sheriff is just gritty. He's just rugged. I would say this story, Solitary Confession, falls under it's kind of a little bit of a western, but not really. It's more of a crime and literary fiction. So yeah. So the sheriff, for some reason, I've always pictured, ever since I wrote it, I always pictured Jeff Bridges playing the sheriff in the story. I have no idea why. Maybe because of Um, because I saw him in a couple westerns, and he just, I don't know, that's just who I picture playing the sheriff. And yeah, so that's pretty much that's that story. I'm not going to spoil any more. It takes a turn. Again, there's a lot of twists and turns in there, but overall, it's a very enlightening story. Kind of opens your eyes. So if you were kind of drifting off after the Liberationist and you wanted something more after the Kryptonite Room, Solitary Confession will rid you of your boring sins. So yeah, one moment. Ha! That's probably like the one time of the year I allow my food to touch. I'm not like Monk. Remember that show Monk, where the guy touched his food? He didn't like his food touching. Yeah, I'm not that bad. But so yeah. All right. The next story. Again, I'm probably gonna finish hella early, but it's all good. The next story is the Hercules Hotel. So the Hercules Hotel is a tale. It's a story about Howard Hughes's H-2 Hercules plane, the infamous H-2 Hercules plane, and how it became a hotel. Now, for those that know who Howard Hughes was and know about his H-2 Hercules plane, you would know that the plane never became a hotel, nor did it fly. It flew once, and that was it. Because it was so freaking big, they flew it once, and it's now in a museum. So this story is a fictional portrayal of the H-2 Hercules plane and how it was once fictionally turned into a hotel. And why did I want to write about this one? Honestly, again, I was I was sleeping, I woke up, and for some reason, I don't know, I think I was watching something with a hotel the night before, and for some reason the title the Hercules Hotel came into my mind. I think I was actually watching something on a hotel, and I was watching something on Howard Hughes. So I guess my mind combined them, and the Hercules Hotel was born. And I was like, well, that's a ridiculous idea. That's all the more reason that I should make a story out of it. So my only issue with this story is the same issue I have with The Liberationist. It's historical fiction, but I'm also aware that millennials these days probably don't give two flying craps about who the hell Howard Hughes was. But let me just break this down for you. If you think you don't care who Howard Hughes was, let me ask you this. Do you like Donald Trump? I'll answer that for you. No, you don't. So I raised you Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was also egotistical and self-absorbed, but he wasn't a toolbag. He wasn't an idiot. He was actually quite innovative. He had OCD, and yeah, if you've ever seen the movie The Aviator, it's all about Howard Hughes. That's the guy that I talk about in the Hercules Hotel. It's a fictional portrayal of him. He's still an egotistical OCD, self-absorbed business maniac, but for the most part, he really carries the story. And there's also a lot of other old actresses and actors of the day in that story. And I wanted to tell that story because I don't know. I guess in the back of my mind, I guess I have a little bit of a appreciation for Howard Hughes and all that he contributed to the world. You know, he gave us a lot of good things that we have today that we kind of sort of take for granted, such as aviation and hotel management. You can thank Howard Hughes for that. And It's at six because I mean I don't have like again it's based off of where I when I wrote it. I don't. It's probably one of those stories where I wouldn't know where the heck to put it. I wouldn't know where to put it if I didn't write it six. So I wouldn't want to put it too far to the back, but here we are. Like so, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes I have dreams about what will become stories of mine, and Solitary Confession was one of them. I also had another. I had written down another one. See, here's the other thing to know. I sometimes I might write a story title down, but I will delete it if nothing comes to me and it's just way too far off. And after Prison Church, aka Solitary Confession, I actually had another dream about like these people at a factory and they were running from something that never presented itself. And they were running on these conveyor belts and these moving floors that actually ended up breaking out. Again, that sounds really cool, but it was a vague, I don't really remember much about it except for that. And then I had another dream where there was this young boy robs they have like you know how like when you're at a convenience store and they have these like leave a penny, if you can like leave a tip on the counter, a little tip jar. Well, this boy comes in and he steals the tip jar, and as he's running out of the store, he trips out on the sidewalk, and this glowing man in a white robe sees him. I was gonna put that in Prison Church, but again, I only got so far with my dream, and then I just forgot all about it. So yeah. All right. Story number 7, The Golden Ballroom. So, funny story. The Golden Ballroom was written the week before New Year's. The Golden Ballroom is the story about a wealthy businessman who decides to hold a lavish New Year's Eve ball in, I believe, 1919. So a little bit before, right before the Roaring Twenties, or maybe it was 1920. In any event, what inspired me to write the Golden Ballroom? Well, this one, if you know me, this one totally makes sense. Right, right. I think The Shining is probably one of the best movies ever. I love that movie. I've seen it so many damn times. And one thing that always intrigues me about The Shining is the Gold Room. It's a room in the Overlook Hotel in The Shining, where Jack Torrance, main character, goes in and he goes to the bar and he gets a drink from the bartender Lloyd. He then later goes back and there's a ball happening. There's a bunch of ghosts, and I kind of sort of thought, hey, I want to write a story about the party that takes place in The Shining in the Gold Room. But then I thought, I don't want Stephen King to sue me. I don't even know if I could legally do it. But wait a minute, don't don't give up on this story. Maybe there's still something you can do. So what I did was I took the Gold Room, the essence of the room itself, and decided to I would make my own story around the concept of the room. So I decided to call it the ballroom. And I told you, not every single title is clever, but the Golden Ballroom, Gold Room, you get it. And again, it's about a wealthy businessman. I think his name's Worthshire. He's got a very prestigious name. And basically, he decides he's going to throw a elegant, lavish, out of this world ball that no one will ever forget for New Year's. But along the way, things happen, life happens, and there's twists, there's turns, but everything connects, and that's really all I can say about that story. But but yeah, I would say it's definitely crime. That was probably that was definitely a crime story, and also horror. So it's a little bit of both. Right? Bar scenes are so good. Yeah, definitely. Um, and finally, last but certainly not least, the last story in the short story emporium, I present to you Dead Presidents Society. Now, that was one of those titles where, again, if you know me, even if you do know me, you don't, maybe you don't, I don't know how many people know this. I can be sitting there watching TV, I can be walking down the street, and all of a sudden, an idea just shoots into my head. What I choose to do with it is entirely up to me. In this instance, I was watching, I'm a bit of a history buff, so I watch the History Channel a lot. And I was watching something on the dead, on, what's it, an old president. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be cool if like a bunch of presidents got together to solve a crime? Like who the fuck thinks of that? Right? Like who thinks of that? Literally nobody. The only thing people think of today when they think of dead presidents is like, that commercial's dumb. Like they think of car commercials because we decided to throw good old George Washington and Abraham Lincoln into freaking car commercials, which is a joke in that story, by the way. Um, Dead President Society is more than just what you think it is. Dead President Society is a story about five obscure, lesser known presidents who are resurrected to solve a crime. They must retrieve a sacred presidential document from getting into the wrong hands. Unfortunately for them, not only does it get into the wrong hands, but they're able to track the person down and they go back, these five obscure presidents, who shall remain nameless. If you want to find out who they are, read the book. They go back to this Congress building, and who's there to present them, who gave them the case to begin with, is good old Benjamin Franklin. Oh, that's why you put the Benjamin Franklin quote at the beginning of the book. You get it. Benjamin Franklin briefs them, gives them the mission. They go back and they say, hey, we have the document. Don't worry, I'm not spoiling anything big. And basically what happens is Benjamin Franklin tells them, the good news is, yeah, you retrieve the document. The bad news is you altered the presidential timeline. You actually altered time. They say, well, how bad is it? And that's where the story, I will stop and say no more, as the presidents will soon find out how badly they screwed up their own presidential timeline. And I also sort of took from 11, what the heck is it called? 11/26/63, the Stephen King book that's about the assassination of JFK. There's a little bit of inspiration from that in that story. And the title, Dead President Society, I don't know, I thought of it one day. I thought it was really cool. And I was like, well, why would they get together? And of course, no, originally, I'm not going to lie to you. Originally, it was George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, JFK, and I don't remember the fifth guy. Maybe Teddy Roosevelt, probably. So Mount Rushmore. It was pretty much Mount Rushmore and another guy, another president. But then I was like, no, I'm not. No, Abraham Lincoln has been done fictionally to death. Anyone ever read Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter? Pretty good book. Shitty movie. Teddy Roosevelt, he's actually in a steampunk book series that I haven't read yet. And George Washington, like, these are presidents we know. So I'm like, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to take five presidents that no one flipping remembers, that millennials wouldn't know from their great-great-grandfather if they were presented to them on a piece of paper, you know? So, five obscure presidents, then President Society, they become detectives and they have to solve a presidential crisis. And yeah, that is the last story in the short story Emporium. And since I still have a little bit of time, I will give a little bit of a rundown. Let me first see what's going on. I love that I have so many people watching. Ha! Uh, all right, so I'll give you a brief rundown. Again, we'll just give a last minute rundown of each story, and then I will give my closing thoughts on this book. The first story, Nightstalkers and Lycanhawks, the tale about vampire cowboys against werewolf Indians after the Civil War. Labyrinth of Torture, the fictional tale of H.H. Holmes, America's first serial killer, and some of his killings during the Chicago World's Fair in his infamous murder castle. The Liberationist, the story of a king who makes 3 rules that he expects his kingdom to follow, only he himself breaks his own rules, and he flees the country. The Kryptonite Room, a man who hates people and society so much that he does something to stop them. And after he stops them, and after he hurts them, he takes an item from the scene, brings it home with him, and puts it into a room called the Kryptonite Room. Solitary Confession, the tale of a preacher who comes to a small town and burns it to the ground. And then he takes all those people and puts them in a church. The Hercules Hotel, a fictional tale about Howard Hughes' H-2 Hercules plane and how he turns it into a hotel for a brief amount of time. The Golden Ballroom, the story about a exquisite businessman who holds a lavish New Year's Eve ball that could prove to be to die for. And finally, Dead President Society, the tale of 5 lesser-known presidents who are resurrected to become detectives to solve a presidential crisis. So yeah, this book was kind of sort of a I wouldn't say a last minute idea, but it was something that let's put it this way. I have lists. You know this. I told you I had a list of short stories, right? I also have a list of books. All my books, like The Wax Factory, The Wax Menagerie. And I'm now 8 books in. Do I know what my next book's going to be? Yes. Do I know what the book after that's going to be? Yes. I have my next 15 books planned out. That's right. And the funny thing about that is before it was 15, it was probably it was 12, right? This book originally wasn't on the list. Even when I thought about making it a book, it wasn't on the list. Until I realized, hey, if you're going to make the short story Emporium into a book, you should probably add it to that list of what you're going to write for books. Oh, yeah. The short story Emporium list. And the process for it wasn't grueling, it wasn't like, oh my God. I wanted to write it because I wanted to give people an idea to show them that I could not only can I write horror and crime thrillers, that's like Mike Tyson. crime thrillers. Not only can I write crime thrillers, but I can write literary fiction and historical fiction. My only issue on the historical fiction stories is that I'm probably going to appreciate the stories more than the reader, but I can't be the only, you know, old millennial. I'm still considered a millennial, so screw you. The only old millennial that would appreciate the Liberationist, uh, the Hercules Hotel, or Dead President Society, because it's all in good fun. That's the other thing. The way I write, it's sometimes it's whimsical, it's fun. So even if you don't appreciate the content that the story is about, you'll appreciate in the way I'm telling it. And who knows, if I can make you appreciate Howard Hughes, H. Holmes, and Calvin Coolidge, uh, that was a president, Calvin Coolidge, look it up, then I think I've done my justice. So, so yeah. Um, the other thing is the other fun thing about this is that when I uh, when I requested a copy for the Wax Menagerie, I ran into a little bit of an issue. They sent it to the wrong house. Yeah, that happened. And not that, but I bought a copy, and then the original copy that I ordered ended up coming a week later. So I have two copies of my second book in the Wax Factory series. But the reason I mention that is because I ordered this on a Friday, and actually no, excuse me, I ordered this on a Monday, and it came Thursday. It came 3 days later. They said it was supposed to get here like Saturday, and I got it like within 3 days. So hats off to Amazon for doing that. I published it last night. I hit the publish button. I mean, yeah. So we're good to go. And yeah, so the Short Story Emporium by yours truly is available on Amazon right now for the Kindle is $3.99 and the paperback is $12.99. Fun fact, I actually looked up how much paperback short story books go for. Couldn't find an estimate. I typed it in on Kindle Store on Amazon, and it wasn't giving me specific titles or it wasn't giving. Let's put it this way: I typed in short story paperback, right? It gave me short stories, but it was giving me everything other than paperback. It was giving me audio, Kindle, even hardcover, because you can actually make hardcovers now. Not sure if everyone knew that. So I was like, screw it. I'll just make it $12.99 like the rest of my books. And yeah, so there's that. Ah, well then, you will definitely like Solitary Confession because that is exactly sort of what it's about. You'll definitely like Solitary Confession because it's kind of just like that. Um, so yeah, I made good time, even though I was 7 minutes late to my own live performance. Uh, again, I'm just going to address the elephant in the room. Uh, I was well aware that there wasn't going to be many people watching this because of the time that I'm doing it. But in all fairness, on Twitter, I imagine there's going to be some group of people that are on their lunch break and whatever, and that's totally fine. So I did it at 12 because I looked up the best time to go live on video on a Friday. They said noon time, and then it even gave me the whole people are on break, maybe, maybe not. In any event, I decided to do the video regardless. So here I am. I will also be going live at 8 o'clock on on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and I will be doing a Q&A session tonight at 8. So yeah, for those that watch this on the playback, please drop on by at 8 o'clock. I will be taking questions on, of course, the book. I am starting to wonder, though. I've gotten 2 snaps. I'm wondering if people can't get in on YouTube. Actually, someone watching said that they tried to watch it on YouTube. So I asked, were you not able to watch it on YouTube? Maybe that might be an issue. I sent the link out on Snap to people for YouTube, and I'm already streaming live on the other 3, so I'm not really sure. Sorry, I hear something in the other room, so. All right. So, it's all good. I before E, remember. Um, so yeah, I'm really starting to wonder if people aren't able to watch this on YouTube with the link that I gave them. Oh, well, that's because I was having technical. I went live originally, but I wasn't able to get on Instagram, so I just stopped it, and then I went back on again after I was able to come onto Instagram. So yeah, definitely. All right. So I have a little bit of time left, so enough of bitching about not having people on this. The Short Story Emporium is a lovely collection of 8 stories, all within 4 genres: horror, crime thrillers, literary fiction, and historical fiction. And I have a scheduled post that will automatically go out after this video at 1:35 over on Facebook and Twitter. And what it is a it's a genre legend, and it's a color coordinated list of all 8. It's a list of all 8 of my stories, and they're all color coordinated by the genres that they fall under, from horror to crime to literary fiction to historical fiction. So I'm scheduling that to go out after this video at 1:35, and I'm encouraging people to, pick it up if you'd like. You can copy and paste it, and I will also probably put a link. No, not a link, but I'll send it to anybody who's interested, who watches this on the playback. I'll send it if you're interested. Yeah. Um, I am happy to have written my 8th book. I'm happy that it's so smooth, and it's just like it's just the right size. Like, I love that it's in it's like it's just such a good size, and good stocking stuffer for all readers in your life that you don't know what to get them. Get them the Short Story Emporium. Who's Justin Bienvenu? He is an underrated, underprivileged author. That's who Justin Bienvenu is. So, with that being said, the Short Story Emporium is available for purchase on Amazon. Uh, I suppose I could probably put a link to, I think, yeah, I'll put a link to to Amazon in this video over on YouTube. I will probably, you're going to be seeing, if you're on any social media of mine and we follow each other, just keep your eyes open. There's going to be automatic posts throughout the day and on the book, and then of course I will post links where available. And yeah, so thank you to the one person that watched this live, at least that I can see. That's the other thing. I don't know. Well, that's not true. There could actually be more than one person watching this, but it doesn't tell me. And if that's the case, restreamio, you suck. But as far as I can tell, the one person watching, thank you so much. Always appreciated. And yeah, so those that watch this on the playback, please, I'm not going to beg, but please. I'm doing a Q&A tonight at 8 o'clock. I would love, even if it's 5 people, that's fun. That's a good time to me. If it's three people, that's a good time to me, right? So yeah, thank you to the one person watching. Thank you to those that watch this on the playback. And please do check out my Q&A tonight at 8. And do check out the Short Story Emporium. 8 stories, all unique and interesting in their own right. So, this has been my live video to celebrate the release of the Short Story Emporium. Until later tonight, au revoir.